Hello and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and today I am sharing a conversation with one of horror's brightest shining lights, one of the most happy, excited people that I know in the genre who just loves to talk about anything horror related, and that is Mr. Jonathan Janz. He is the author of such titles such as The Dismembered, the Children of the Dark books, 1 and 2, and most recently in the book that we will be discussing, Veil. He's just such a delight to talk to. I'm sure that you're going to be able to tell that in this conversation. It is so much fun. We also talk about his story that was featured in the Stand anthology, The End of the World as We Know It. And yeah, overall, fabulous time, wonderful time. I hope that you all enjoy it, and I will talk to you guys at the end of this episode. Hello, Mr. Jant. How are you?
I am amazing. How are you, my friend?
I am doing very well. I am thrilled that I officially have you on the podcast. We are here to talk about your upcoming release, Veil, and you just had a little something come out, a little short story in the End of the World as We Know It anthology, and I'm just so excited to get to chat with you about any and all of the above.
Well, thank you, my friend. I am so delighted to be here. I really appreciate you having me on here. It's going to be a blast.
Absolutely. So, on the off chance that people may not know who you are, Jonathan Jans, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for those who may not be as familiar with your work as I am?
Sure. I am an author and I'm also a public school teacher. And yeah, I think I write mostly horror, but I think horror is so vast that
Yeah.
it includes all these other subgenres. So horror, but for me, that's a really like expansive territory.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who's read a good bit of your work, I would say that you hit a lot of notes of horror.
Thank you.
But like I mentioned today, we're here to talk about two stories in particular, and I feel like we should start with the one that's already out that people may have already read, which
Yeah.
is Lenora. That is the short story that was in the Stand anthology with, however many other incredible contributors. I have to ask you, because I mean, we're talking on September 1st. So this came out, the anthology came out like 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
What's it been like since it's been out?
It's been just a really wonderful, surreal kind of breakneck pace, like all kinds of things happening at once. I've not seen the movie, but what's that title? Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
I bought that movie for my film class and I haven't watched it yet, but that's what it feels like is Everything Everywhere All at Once. In a good way, in a great way. It's been amazing, but it's just been really like a blur.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, I feel and a lot of people have done interviews about the anthology and all that good stuff. And we will talk a little bit about your story, but I'm so interested in how this has felt for every contributor to get the call and be, or like to be part of this and, be like, hey, you're going to play in the sandbox. Like, what
Yeah.
did that feel like? And like, is this how you imagined it would go? Like, what's the experience been like?
It was so wild. Yeah, Brian Keene called me and it was just kind of like an out of body thing. Like it was really an exciting, obviously a super exciting phone call, but just really unexpected. Like Brian and I are, we're really good friends and he calls from time to time, texts more often. So it wasn't like that like shocking that he called at all. But then when he started to go into it, I was like, wait a minute, what is happening? I guess I think he started out by talking about the project.
Yeah.
And like we're good enough friends that I would just be excited for him to be the editor on this project. And I didn't know if that's what he was calling me to tell me, like, hey, I got this great news I wanted to share, which would have been completely fine. But yeah, this hope started to kindle in me as he's talking about it a little bit. But then I was trying not to get my hopes up, because I'm like, it's The Stand, it's Stephen King. Like, there's so many authors. In fact, I think it'd be much easier to like find the authors who have not been touched by Stephen King. And that's not just in horror, that's across genres. Like I suspect that's the way with mystery writers, with well, I mean, I think it's been proven. Like a lot of these authors in the collection aren't strictly horror writers, right?
Hmm.
Um, but they like count they count him as this major, major influence. So I think across genres, like generations of people have been influenced by him and love him. And so yeah, when he introduced the project, then he said, okay, he said, and Jonathan, I'd like to invite you to submit a story. And I was yeah so excited, but immediately like I started to understand the ramifications of that and started to realize that okay, this has to be good.
Yeah.
People are actually going to read this.
I imagine it's a very quick, like, oh hell yeah, like quick, oh shit moment. You know what I
A
mean?
hundred
Like,
percent, both of those things, boom, boom, right like that. Yeah,
yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think anybody who's ever heard any of your other interviews that you've done with other folks or just like heard you talk about your writing, they know how big of an influence King is on your work. So it's like, whenever you went down the list of contributors, there was to me certain names that popped out. I'm like, oh, that meant a lot to this person, I bet. And your name was like, one of them. And I was like, oh, I know this is a big deal for him,
you knew, you
I
knew.
knew. I
Yes,
did.
absolutely. I have not kept that a secret, have I? But I don't know. I okay, so a long time ago, Joe Lansdale and I were that sounded like a name drop, and it didn't mean I didn't intend.
So,
And Joe is somebody in whom I'm in awe, like of whom I'm in awe. I love Joe Lansdale, and he's a major influence on me, like my third or fourth favorite writer of all time. But I was talking to Joe at Scares That Care, one of the events, and I was just saying like how important his work was to me, but also I had mentioned a couple other writers, and before that sentence was even out of my mouth, Joe said, "Tell him." Said, tell him, Jonathan, you're never gonna feel bad telling somebody who's helped you, thank
mhm.
you. That's never gonna be something that you feel regretful of. You're gonna regret if that person passes away and you never say it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh dang, that's a truth bomb. Like that's as real as it gets. And so that gave me permission to let go of all of the reasons why I wouldn't like acknowledge the people that have influenced me because
Hmm.
again, you do that, people can be cynical. They're like, "Oh, he's currying favor. He's blah blah blah," and it really helped me let go of that. Just because life is too short. Because the people who would be that cynical aren't people I need to worry about anyway, really.
Yeah.
So it means much more to me that people who have helped me know that and that they know how much I appreciate them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially at least the way that it's felt to me is like your enthusiasm and your love for King is so genuine. Like there's never a doubt in my mind that it's like, oh, it's an attention. Like you love that man and what he has done for you and that man's writing. Like there's not a doubt in my mind. And I do tend to agree with that advice of like you need to tell the people that have meant the most to you what that means because I mean like imagine never knowing,
Yeah,
sitting in in his seat if nobody ever told him.
yeah,
But no, I love that. And I think it just, I'm all for it. I think that positivity is great. I'm all for all the positive things. So, I mean, if you have something positive to say about somebody, you should do it, in a genuine way, like and it comes from the heart.
yeah. And I like how you said that. Like it really is kind of a good general rule for life, I think, to tell anybody who matters to us that they matter to us. And, we tend to forget to do that sometimes. It's much easier to just be busy and so I think that
Yeah.
that's a good way to live, just period. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would argue that both of your works that we're here to talk about today kind of touch into a little bit of those things. So, Lenora, I'm gonna let you introduce the plot of this short story, and I have a public bone to pick with Neil McRobert because I just listened to his episode with you, that in which I'll talk about the story, and we both read it around the same time,
Yeah.
and he was so convinced about the way that the ending was and like really bleak and really messed up and I was like, I don't know, man. I just didn't read it that way. And then I heard y'all's conversation and I was like, I think I was right. I think JS is proving right. But I digress. I'll let you explain the plot and we'll get into the intricacies of that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So the story Lenora is of course in The Stand in that book, the super flu basically destroys the world. But my main character, his world was destroyed even before the super flu. He had lost everybody and everything. And when everybody else starts dying from the super flu, this preacher shows up on his front lawn with a little red wagon that is containing an animal. And the animal is like this baby antelope called a dik-dik. And my main character, Baker Ludlow, wants nothing to do with this animal, wants nothing to do with anybody or anything. And that's how the story begins.
Yeah. I have so many questions about this story, and mostly it's like, how did you land on the dick of all creatures? Because that is the most, you look at that little thing and your heart just
Oh,
melts.
it's
There's
so
no doubt about the fragility of that thing.
It's so sweet. It's so sweet. Well, just just to answer that directly, once I got the idea, I kind of knew I had the very tiny little, morsel of the idea. My first image was this something coming through a doggy door.
Yeah,
Um, and so I'm like, okay, and I knew for some reason I wanted it to be an exotic pet because I knew that that was going to be a place where some bad things had happened.
yeah.
And I know, I'm sure there are exotic pet owners who are really like that own, businesses that are really good people. But I've also, I mean, the Tiger King and other shows I've seen
Yeah.
where it gets pretty crazy and pretty scary, Like I think people can be unscrupulous. And I guess you could say that about anybody, but yeah, so I knew it was going to go through the doggy door at some point in the story, and so it had to be small enough to fit. And so that narrowed it down because it couldn't be
Yeah.
something massive, and so I began to like research exotic pets. And the moment I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like choked up looking at that thing. It is the sweetest looking little critter. And then I started watching little videos about dik-diks and studying them, and they're just just precious. They're just awesome animals. Yeah, so that's kind of how I landed on it.
Yeah. And in particular, whenever they cry too. Oh, it's like I've heard that video and, events transpire and that does come up. Oh my God, my heart. Um, and it's very much if I had to like pitch this story to somebody who
Yeah,
like really didn't even have an interest in the stand, I'd be like, the theme of like the old man who like hates the world and his kids get him a dog and he never wanted the dog and then they come back like a month later and the man's like best friends with the dog and will die without the dog. Like this is that in fiction format set
yeah.
in the backdrop of the stand. How did this come to be? Like the whole journey of like it's a wide world to play in the stand, right? And I
Yeah,
know that, you wanted to tell the main character's story about kind of like leveling his playing field, like his world has already been over, right?
right.
That's obviously very intentional, but how did you land on where that would go in a world as wide as the stand?
Yeah, I think that was that was both that both made this appealing and exciting and also a little challenging
Hmm.
because like The Stand, like I've said this before about the book, I feel like The Stand kind of is like life.
Yeah.
Like as much as a novel can actually like can talk about life and encapsulate life, every emotion, every experience, I mean it's all there. It's the best writer of all time in my opinion, working on his biggest canvas ever.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think that made it a little bit intimidating at first and a little challenging. I reread The Stand after Brian asked me, and then I listened to The Stand, really immersed myself in it. Like every time I would be in my basement working out, I would be listening to the audiobook.
Hmm.
And the guy who does it, I forget his name. His initials are like GG, like Grover. I forget his name, but he's awesome. Like he did such a good job. So like that guy is like my friend now. But I think that, it reminds me a little bit about Spielberg, like Steven
Yeah.
Spielberg. Even though he's great at spectacle, people think of like Jurassic Park and they think of like these big, like War of the Worlds when he blows up that city. He always remembers that it's the human element. He always remembers that it's those intimate connections we have with people. And so I think that it was the tone of The Stand. It was the loneliness. It was the pain. Out of those things were kind of born Baker Ludlow. And my favorite character in The Stand is Stu Redman.
Hmm.
And he's a guy, even though he's much younger than Baker, he's like half Baker's age. He's got some haunting in his past. He's got some regrets. He's got some sadness and tragedy that kind of haunts him. And so I don't know if that transmitted itself to my story, but it certainly couldn't have hurt, because I do feel like some of that tone, the way that King writes him, like Stu is an old soul. So when
Hmm.
we first meet him, I think he's sitting in a gas station like an old man would. You know, I mean, I know people of any age can sit in a gas station and hang out, but it's something that I kind of picture an older man doing, like drinking coffee with his friends. And so there's Stu the first time we meet him, and I do. The more I think about it, I think that that had something to do with Baker. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And where the story goes, obviously it's always hard to interview about short stories because there's only so much that we can say without spoiling things, right? But
Yeah.
to talk about the ending, you leave it up to the reader's interpretation about, where things are going, I would say. And like I mentioned before, it can be taken one of two ways. And the way that I read that story is it was just really heartbreaking, but it was very touching and beautiful.
Yeah.
And I don't know why there was something about your story that just took me back to the opening of Midsummer
Oh,
whenever she finds, like the whole setup of her family being dead and deceased and like how bleak that is. And that was like how I thought about Baker's circumstances.
wow.
But like you were still giving us something to care about and root for, even whenever it seems like that bleak, like that visually bleak, that, whatever. So I don't know. I commend you very much on that story. It does a lot of work in such a short space. And like I said, I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to give anything away, but I was touched and felt a little bit it was sad, but I was a little bit more optimistic by the end, unlike Neil.
Yeah, and that's okay. So I'm gonna reveal. I've never revealed this. I don't even think I said this to Neil yet, because we had our conversation a while ago, our second interview a while ago, and so he had that reaction to it, like you talked about, like kind of a reading that kind of bordered on like sinister
Yeah.
doings at the end, right?
Hmm.
He wasn't the only one. Like there weren't that many people that had read it at that point, but there was one other person, I forget who it was, that had read it and had that reaction. And you had the reaction you talked about, which was the ending that I wanted to leave the reader with. My wife had the same one. Brian Keene and Chris Golden had that reaction. So that was the majority reaction. But the fact that at that point, like two out of the six had reacted that way, I'm like, oh geez, I need to look at this. So I changed it a little bit.
Yeah.
So the version that's in the book now, the version in so Ed Schlesinger, who was the editor for this project at Simon and Schuster, I brought this to him. And I said, look, I mean, I'm getting there haven't been that many, but I've been getting really positive reactions to the story, which is exciting. But, and I love it. Like ambiguity can be wonderful. And there are things that I've written that I've intended to have like different interpretations. And I think that can be awesome. And I also like love it when readers interact that way. Like in a way, I was very flattered and excited that these other two readers read that. But for this particular story, I felt like the ending that I really wanted to leave readers with was the ending that had been earned in the story
Yeah.
by the characters and the goings on. So I was like to Ed, I was like, I've got to like, and it didn't involve much at all. Like all it involved was we just took the last page basically. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I've just got to tweak a couple things. I've got to add a couple things. And literally, and it was like, I mean, I think I changed like four lines. Like I changed the wording on two lines and then I added two more lines. And Ed was the one who helped me kind of spitball those. He came up with some
Hmm.
ideas and some things. And I think one of those lines actually was Ed. One or two of those, maybe the two new ones might have been from Ed. And I just think it makes all the difference because I don't think it's as ambiguous now. I mean, again, it's always fine if people read something into it that I didn't intend. But in this case, I think it's less ambiguous because of that help that he provided me.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen the work that like moving a word, like not even adding or removing, but like moving a sentence
Yeah.
does for like changing the tone of a whole freaking book. So I believe in the power of editing and those kinds of things. And I
Yeah.
think, for me, had your story not been from you, I don't know that I would have read it the same way.
Yeah.
But I think it's because I've like read enough of your work now to kind of like have an idea of maybe what you were hoping for. No, I'm not saying that to anybody who read it the other way that they read it right or wrong, but I think it goes back to what you said about like the Spielberg factor of it all. Is like he always does manage to make like I mean Jaws excluded. But I'm thinking like as much as I hate to say it, like E.T. and like those things, like they're very heartfelt. There's a reason that you care for the creature. Like one of my favorite things, and I think he had a hand in it was Super 8, which is
Yes, you
like
did.
yeah,
Yes.
that's like one of my favorite movies. I haven't seen it in a while, but that was like one of my favorite movies when I was younger.
Yeah,
And it's about the kids. It's not about necessarily that it's about the kids. So when you make it about the character, I think that that's where you pull on the heartstrings of humanity. Although the landscape of the stand is very bleak and rife with, people who also frolic in the terrible. So I
for
don't know.
sure.
I think it's such a cool thing whenever you combine the already existing kind of reputation that the world of the stand has and everybody gets to have their own voice. Because I think that totally plays with perception, right? Like, just completely throws things off the rails in a way.
It really does. And I think that's to the credit of Brian and Chris. It's also to the credit of Stephen King. The one caveat we are given, and I think this has been said in enough interviews that I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, but the one caveat was that we were not to use the main canonical characters as
Yeah.
our main characters, like Stu and Franny and Larry. But I just found out the other because Brian told me that. That was the second phone call that way back when this whole thing started. I didn't know until recently that that was Brian and Chris. That was their edict. That wasn't
Yeah.
Stephen King, which to me, I mean, so King basically just opened up this chest of wonders and said, "Have at it, go ahead." And yeah, it was Brian and Chris's idea to do to obviously they deserve so much credit, but I think just all of them and especially maybe Stephen King to just be so like generous and willing to let us express ourselves. And I'll just be honest, I haven't read the rest. I've only read two of the other stories.
Yeah.
They're so wildly different. And just
Yep.
reading some of the reviews, I think that these stories are wildly different because of that freedom that we were given. We're very empowered, I think, to write what we felt we should write.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of my favorite things of the whole project is like I got to see what the stand looked like to Haley Piper. Like that was not anything that I ever thought that I needed to experience, but I did. Like that was really freaking cool.
Yeah,
And like the big thing that like Alma's story, huge, huge fan of that one. That one's like one of my favorites.
that's one of the two I've read. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I love it. It's so good. Oh, it's
Yeah,
so
no. It's
yeah.
it's a really good one. But I want to move on from this project to talk about Veil because that's the big one, right? It's the big upcoming thing for you that's coming out in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's really funny that you bring up Spielberg because I have to kind of talk about the whole alien thing with this book.
Yeah.
It's not a secret that it's an alien book, but Veil kind of walks the line of horror and sci-fi, I would say. And if you want to go ahead and introduce the plot, I'll let you introduce it. I'm always terrified I'm going to spoil things, but it's a action-packed novel. It crosses many genres, but yeah, if you want to go ahead and introduce it, I'll let you take the mic on that one.
Absolutely. And just one thought I don't want to forget. You mentioned Super 8. I use that in my creative writing class.
Oh
Uh,
hell yeah.
and it's produced by Spielberg. And so even though J.J. Abrams directed it, Spielberg's like warmth and
Yep.
humanity. Not that J.J. Abrams doesn't have those things, but like Spielberg certainly does. And they're just all over that. His fingerprints are all over that. And I totally agree with you. It's so, so good. Anyway, Veil. So Veil is about people disappearing. And in fact, the opening scene, our main character has somebody very close to him disappear. And then we find out that these disappearances are happening on a mass scale. And so something must be doing it. But because whatever's doing it is invisible, there's no way to predict it or stop it or get back the people who have been taken. And so it becomes this kind of worldwide horrible phenomenon, this catastrophic, almost like apocalyptic event. And my main character, I'll just say he loses a lot, and everything seems very bleak and hopeless until some of the people who have not been taken, people who have lost somebody, they encounter somebody who can see the aliens, see the creatures. And the reason why is because this person had a terrible car accident. And so this brain injury allows this person to see through the veil and to see these creatures that are doing this. So the survivors, these people are so desperate to give their loved ones back, they decide they are going to undergo this dangerous, revolutionary, unprecedented brain surgery to replicate that injury so they can both see the creatures, fight them, and try to get their loved ones back.
Yeah, it feels so epic, but the cool thing about Veil is you don't start there. You
No,
start very, very small. It is very personal, it is very microscopic, and then it just gets blown out the water. So
yeah,
I want to ask about how the inspiration for the story came to you because I think it's such an interesting way to tell it, to start on, and like much like The Stand, it's all about the people, right? That's what makes it
yeah,
so grandiose is like all these different people being affected. And while we only get like really one point of view for Vale, it ends up being this huge thing. So I just kind of want to
yeah.
hear about how this all started for you.
Yeah. So for me, I think I think it was just kind of imagining myself in this scenario. I used to take night walks with my kids when they were younger. I still need to do it with my girls that are in high school. But anyway, we would walk to Insomnia Cookies through our neighborhood, and it's on the edge of the neighborhood, and we would go get cookies at night, and it was always like this, secret thing. My wife always goes to bed early. So it's like, mom would be in bed and it'd be like 9:30. I'm like, hey, you want to go? And they'd be like so excited. So we'd like steal out of the house and some just very special memories. And so I remember on some of those walks, like I always, it's night. And so I would keep my kids close to me. And I always have this. My wife says I see the world like a Final Destination movie. Like I see like peril at every turn and in every object. And that's sort of true. So I was always trying to prevent harm. And I would always just keep an extra special eye when it was at night because I didn't want anything to snatch one of my kids. And so I think that probably that fear, that potentiality had been in me a long time, like specifically, and that became the opening scene. And then it became a matter of like, okay, so how would I react to this if it happened? How would that affect a family? How would that affect a neighborhood and a town and then the world? And it became just this massive canvas on which I got to write. But as you said, it's one POV. Like we do see how it affects all these other people. We meet all these other characters, but it's a single POV told in the present tense, first person all the way through. And so I feel like that gives it like an intimacy and an urgency, but at the same time, I don't think we sacrificed the spectacle that we
Mhm.
would get in like a bigger budget movie. So I feel like I kind of had my cake and ate it too.
Yeah, I get that. I think that there's something almost a little bit more unsettling about being in a character's head that's taking in the information of like huge catastrophe or disaster because you know what that feels like. Like you know what it is to catch the news out the corner of your
Yeah,
eye or to
yeah,
overhear on the radio like, oh shit, this is much worse than we thought.
right.
Um, and I kind of want to talk about like the role of genre with Veil
Yeah,
because it, like I said, it straddles a lot of places. Like, so I would argue that it's very, very freaking horrific. But obviously, there's some sci-fi roots, right? Especially because you kind of get into like the science aspect with the brain injuries and stuff.
yeah,
But then also, it moves pretty quick. Like, it's pretty fast paced. So I would argue it's very actiony in some ways. I mean, what I know that genre is important for readers to know what they're getting themselves into.
sure.
But I think with a story like this, like I don't know that genre really matters. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really nicely said. It kind of reminds me, if it is a genre, it's definitely hybrid. It
Hmm.
reminds me a little bit like if I were to like find the best comp to give you the experience, I don't know, like something like Aliens
Yeah.
or some maybe even A Quiet Place.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that like Aliens definitely has the action side, right? But it's scary and it's sci-fi for sure. And I think Quiet Place definitely has the sci-fi and horror as well. But I think, yeah, like you said, it's one of those. I think it really kind of sprawls over genres, and I just think it's a kind of book I think a mass market audience will enjoy, even if they're not sci-fi, if they're not horror, even if they're not an action. I just think it's like this big, like exciting story. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to see what like the mass market paperback copy from like the 80s would look like on this one. Like the
Yeah.
metallic font on the front, like
Right.
the claw that's like, sticking out, raised on the cover. I just feel like that would look really cool, but that's an aside.
Did,
Anyway,
did you read it on eARC or in
yeah, I had a
it?
York. Hmm.
So it has, I can't show it to you obviously right now, but it's like they did this shiny stuff on the
Oh
claw
yeah.
on the actual paperback. So it's not like the 80s like you're talking about, but it is
It's a
like
small touch.
a little bit of throwback. Yeah, which I love. Like I was so excited when they said that because my mind went to what you're talking about. I'm thinking, "Oh, that's wicked." And then I saw it and it's, that's the one part where there's a claw coming down from one kind of dimension to another or one world into another. And so the claw itself and then the place where it's like breaking through and it's sparking, like that's the part that's shiny. So it really
Yeah.
kind of, I appreciate that Blackstone did that because I think they might have recognized what you're talking about in the story.
Well, it's almost like, like you mentioned Alien and Aliens and like that kind of thing. Like we know what
Yep.
those mass market paperback movie adaptation novels look like, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like a very similar vibe is what, the story's putting off. Um, and the other thing too, you brought up A Quiet Place, and a lot of what these stories deal with, I think, in particular with disappearance, is losing control over like what you thought you could control, or like kind of like parenting and responsibility. And I don't know if you read Nat Cassidy's When the Wolf Comes Home yet, but he has a line in there about like how do you protect? Like how do you like when the impossible happens, like how do you protect? And I feel like that is so central to your main character John's dilemma, motivation, conflict, like whatever you want to call it. I know that you're a parent. What was the writing experience like for you writing this book and having kids, and like I would imagine you have these these fears like you mentioned with the inspiration about like keeping your kids closer at night and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, Nat's an awesome writer. I haven't read his new one yet. I heard wonderful things. I've read Mary, and I loved Mary. But yeah, and that's a great line that he had too. So I'm definitely going to read that book. As far as like the experience of parenting and then how that informed this, like I'll just like I'll give you like the bullet points. But essentially, I have been afraid of losing my kids since my son was born, my
Hmm.
first child. And that's, I don't know, it sounds very negative and maybe even a little pathetic, but I think that, the more we love something, the easier it is to fear losing it. Or the more likely we are to fear losing it. And it's not a great way to think. And I think we try to battle that because it feels negative. But I think it's maybe just in our nature to want to hold on to what we love, whatever that is. Like you've got that, this is a podcast, but I'm looking at Charlie, your dog in the background, and I've got a dog named Elle, like we want them to be around for 100 years. And, so I think it's just loving something. I think that's the nature of love, that you want it to be permanent. You want it to last forever. You want the time together to last forever. And so I just struggled so much, so mightily. And I had so much anxiety about my kids growing up and someday leaving me that I was losing sleep. I was waking up sobbing in the middle of the night when my kids were in elementary school, and just trying to cling to every moment and keep them with me and just love them. And so I got on medication, and I needed to so badly. So that helped a lot, both for sleep and for those nighttime anxieties. But yeah, so I guess the point I'm getting to is that fear, that potential pain is never too far from me.
Hmm.
It's like the love is always there, but I think the flip side of that is that fear. And so when I wrote the book, it was both very easy to dial into that. It was very natural and it was very authentic. But at the same time, it was extremely emotional and taxing. And I didn't cry during the writing of the whole book, but there were some scenes that did, especially like there's a scene near the end where
I
I
can imagine which one it is.
yeah, exactly. You know
Yeah.
which one it is. And I cried so hard. And I would not even cry when I wrote it. I cried when I edited. And I edit my books so many times. Every freaking time I'd go through, I'd cry. So I think that was both why the book was a challenge, but also I think maybe a little cathartic. And also I just think it's very, very raw and authentic. And I think that's to the story's credit.
Yeah. I think for me personally, speaking for myself and my reading experience, that came through very clearly for me.
Good.
I was like, this is like Jonathan's love letter to his kids. Like this is
Yeah.
very much like in tune with how he feels about his kids. And
Yeah.
it's so like, you brought up at the beginning, you're like, maybe it's cheesy or, I think you even said pathetic, but like I know my mom, I'm an only kid. And when she had me,
Yeah.
she has told me multiple times, she was like, I would not let you like sleep off of my chest because I was afraid you would stop breathing if I wasn't touching you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I know, I'm not a parent myself, but I've heard, in different variations and iterations from friends and family, just how deep that love runs. And I feel like you have managed to inject that into this book. Because even though it's about like these, scary aliens and, all this other shit, it's really, really about like how far you'll go for like the ones you love.
For the ones you
Um,
love. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
yeah, so I've read it very emotionally, and then like on the flip side of that, like like you said, that's why it makes the horror so much grander, right? Like that's why everything is so much scarier because you have that much more to lose. And in particular, like we've already, you've mentioned with the aliens, like you can't see them. Much like much like life's biggest like shifts, whether it's like, the moments of like graduating high school and moving off to college and getting married, or, like the unexpected like tragedies that we experience as humans. You can't see those coming sometimes either, or you don't know the shape that they take.
Yeah.
And that felt so intentional with Veil. And I was curious if you were very conscious about that, or if that was just a byproduct of you telling the story.
That's wild. Yeah. I mean, it is a wonderful metaphor for that. But I don't think I definitely wasn't consciously aware of that when I wrote it, like
Hmm.
unpredictability, all that stuff. I think what I was thinking more of when I was creating it, first of all, like I found it very scary, the idea of not seeing
Yeah.
them. And then as I was writing it, like, because there's certain, you hear snippets of interviews and you remember scenes from movies and they just kind of imprint on you. I remember talking to Josh Mallerman one time about how like Bird Box,
Hmm.
the what's scary about Bird Box and what you can't see and all that stuff. And I agree with him for that story. And then also though, like I was thinking of Jaws. And you
Yeah.
mentioned Jaws earlier, and that's one of my favorite films, but I was thinking about how the inability of the shark to work, the mechanical shark, how that ended up making the movie so much better because less is more. Like the less we see the shark, the scarier it is when we finally see it. And so I think it's another case of my trying to have my cake and eat it too. It just happened organically. But like I love that this is an unseen, unknown entity and menace. And I think that does make it frightening. But at the same time, Stephen King wrote this. I think he wrote it in Dance Macabre, maybe, but he was talking about how Lovecraft would like open the door like slightly ajar and let the reader like peek through but not see the horror. He would just intimate it. He would just suggest
Yeah.
it. But King was more likely to just kick the door open. And I'm that way too. Like and there's not it's not right or wrong, it's just different. But I'm like I want to show these. I want to show these creatures. Like we've built up to them for so long. I want there to be a visual payoff for the reader. I want them to, in other stories that wouldn't have been right, but in this story I felt like it was the right thing to do. And because we do finally see them, then I think you talked about how many different genres are represented and how many different like flavors and modes the book has. I think it just kicks us into some different gears that I think are also really fun and exciting and scary.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like whenever you're reading it and you don't know the rules of like whatever the hell is going on, like you can't
Yeah.
rely on your senses, right? And then like there's even the point where they get to where they think they know what they're doing and they're risking a lot, but they don't know for sure. And
No,
then they're like
no.
there's even bigger point where they're like we're gonna cross over this threshold and
Yes.
I'm like is there oxygen? is there gravity?
Right,
Like
right,
I'm like
exactly.
asking like all the logical questions, and I'm just like kind of freaking out the whole entire time, like sweating, like, oh man, there's so much to think about.
Yes.
But I think that's what, really helps with the book's pacing is like that's what just fuels this thing, forward really quickly. It's because like, well, I need to hurry up and figure out, like I need to know if these people are gonna be able to breathe.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that you had those thoughts, by the way. I love that. And those are the kind of thoughts my wife was having. She never reads my work. This is the first book of mine she's read in like 11 years. And she loved it. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. But she would like talk to me because she's a very artistic person. She's a singer and a pianist and an organist and very artistic. And so like her favorite thing is not science and all that stuff, but she was really fascinated by some of the scientific possibilities and questions. And I think that there was a lot of stress testing that happened with this before I wrote it, as I was writing it, then in the editing. And I got a lot of really good perspectives, like, because we talked about the creatures. I had somebody ask me, I mean, because there are questions, even no matter how objective and encompassing we try to be, we don't think of everything, right? That's why we need
yeah,
other. You talked about the role of the editor. I always will need editors, and I always like surrender myself to editors. I'm so thankful for them. Like that's one of the reasons why I never would have self-published, just because I need that extra set of eyes. I need those
yeah.
multiple sets of eyes to not just find a comma, but to like, to think of things that I've not thought of. So like this person, one of the pre-readers for Blackstone said to me, because I'd already, obviously, they had the manuscript by that point, and I'd done so much work and so much research and talked to so many people. This reader said to me, how do we know these creatures even have bodies in the traditional sense? I'm like, whoa, what? No bodies? Like, how are they, snatching people if they don't have bodies? But it like, it really took me aback. I'm like, whoa, 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 wait. Like, doesn't I mean, living thing have a body of some sort? But anyway, it's like that's how abstract I had to eventually become and consider all these possibilities. And I think that made the book better. And I think also too, and one thing I like about the book, this sounds immodest because I'm bragging about the book, but I feel like the balance of like story and science, I feel like it's a nice balance
Hmm.
because I don't feel like because I've had that experience with books where I'm like, oh boy, there's the writer showing off his research.
Yeah, the info dumping. Yeah.
Info
No, you
dumping.
don't do
Oh,
that. Yeah.
here we go. Time for a lecture, right? Here we go. He's going to show off for 5 pages about all the crap he learned. I never wanted to feel like that, right? I wanted it to be part of the story. And I just feel like I did so much of that and then edited the book so many times that I feel like the science is kind of blended in very organically.
Oh no, I would argue very much so. And I think the only reason that like my mind was going a mile a minute with scientific questions is because of
Yeah.
how rooted the story is and like a reality that we all know in
Yeah.
terms of like human connections and like,
Yeah.
oh, this is probably what would happen if the world would start to end. Like even beyond the the alien shit, just the
Yeah.
the normal like political uprising, societal lines that are crossed, like nobody upholding the social construct that we've built. Like
Yeah.
that all makes so much sense. So that whenever you start throwing out stuff like other dimensions, I'm like, wait, gravity. You know what I mean? Like,
Right, right.
yeah,
Yeah, gravity, dude. There's so many things to think about. You talked about the threshold, and it's on the cover. But yeah, I mean, I think we can safely say that there might be another like world somewhere in this book. I guess that's hopefully not too big of a spoiler
oh,
because
I don't
it,
think so.
and so when you consider another world and you're considering creatures from another world, wow, like there's a lot to think about, like you're talking
Yeah.
about. I love that. Like I love that people are thinking about all those things because I'm thinking about, gravity and air and toxicity and predatory species and what all could their food, like all these things. So anyway, yeah.
No, that and to your credit, I think that you did a very good job of not info dumping, but like bringing them up in a natural progression of things. And like this is all towards the end of the novel, so I'm speaking very vaguely, but as their, whatever, I don't know what you want to call it, journey, whatever mission progresses, there are certain things that they run into that, logically make sense that they would run into in this kind of a situation. So I think that that works really well.
Good.
And I want to pivot a little bit to actually talk about, like the alienness of it.
Yeah.
I have a thing where I am terrified of aliens, like
Oh, wow.
terrified. And I mean, it's a joke. Many people know it now, but like I can't deal with ET. Like ET ruined my life as a kid, and he still does.
Oh, gosh.
I would spray him with Raid if I could.
Wow.
Because, and the thing about it is though, is it's like this foreign entity that is like presenting itself, and everybody's like, oh my God, we'll just let the kids be friends with it. It'll just live in the closet. We have no problems with it. Whatever. Um, but you do a good thing. You're on my good side because if this would have been a book about like aliens, like the body snatching kind,
Yeah.
the human presenting kind, I would have been in shambles. I would have been done for, Jonathan. I would have never made it through. But these aliens very clearly have one mission and one mission only, and it's not good. And that is spelled out very, very early on. Um,
Yeah.
and we were talking about the Spielberg of things, earlier, so I think it's very fitting that we have this conversation. Were you ever tempted to make them friendly or, like have heart or humanity or kind of like I don't know, like I don't think it's a spoiler to say, but they very clearly are taking people and they have a reason that, you'll find out later, but they're very mean and lean creatures from page one. So
Yeah.
what was that decision like?
Well, I mean, honestly, I love everything you just said, by the way, but I think that like the main thing about a villain is they need to be plausibly motivated, you
Hmm.
know? And so, and I th and they do. They have a very plausible motivation, and from their perspective, what they are doing is absolutely the right thing. And there's a line in there, I think, where and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but where a character gets a glimpse of the way that they look at us. And I
Hmm.
think I used the phrase like cows and maggots.
Hmm.
And like you look at the way humans treat. you
Yeah.
know. I mean, we use other species for food. There's certain species that we completely vilify. And what if an alien group perceived us that way? Would they have any compunction about doing whatever they needed to do to get what they needed from us? And I don't think so, because again, I think we tend to walk around thinking we're pretty, we're not evil. Like, you and I go through the day and we're kind to each other and we love animals and all that stuff. But at the same time, like I think if we really scrutinize our behaviors, I think it gets troubling.
Oh, no doubt.
Myself, like I eat meat.
Yeah.
I eat, but if I'll, and this is so vegetarians are going to hear this and they're going to think I'm a hypocrite. And I'm just telling you, I am. You're right. I am a hypocrite. I admit it completely. Because if I saw the conditions in which some of these animals were raised, I don't know that I could eat that, whatever it is. And it's kind of like this to choose to put up this veil, to
Hmm.
choose to not think about that for my own, well-being and nutrition and lack of guilt. So I think to a degree, not to vilify humankind, but I think that, I think that that's something that we kind of do to a degree, but boy, those aliens really do. There's I love these. They're so ruthless. They're so
They
awful.
are.
And because I also like I love that too. I admire when a storyteller is not afraid to make a villain really awful. And that it's how I kind of approached werewolves in the book Wolfland. It's how I
Hmm.
approached dust devils, vampires in that. Yes, they have their own script. Yes, they have their own motivation. Yes, it's plausible, but they're not sweet. And I think that's there's something fun about that,
Oh
and then
yeah.
something almost fun in how diabolical the aliens are.
Yeah, and as messed up as it is, I'm very thankful for that because again, I don't know what it I just and I understand I'm a walking contradiction. I talk about just now like how much I love Super 8 and that's another alien movie and I'm like an X-Files nerd. Again, aliens. But there's something to me about the idea of something presenting itself as something that it's not that just
Yeah,
really freaks me out. Like just
yeah,
really, really freaks me out. So whenever you're able to lean in fully to whatever the nature of that thing is, that makes it, much more palatable, I guess, for me is the way that I think of it. But
let
I'm
me,
I'm with you very much about, like you can't think about certain things too long because I too would not probably want to eat chicken if I thought about,
right,
that too long.
right.
And I don't know what that says about me that that we feel that way, but it's also like you got to pick your battles and you're going along to get along and you're trying to,
Yeah,
that's a whole other conversation about humanity and, trying to get by, but
yeah, it's
I'm
kind of
with you on that one.
yeah, like compartmentalization to maintain one's sanity. Also, though, I just wanted to say I've never said this anywhere. This is just a brief glimpse. I've never talked about this book anywhere. I've not written it yet, but I think Children of the Dark 3 might be a troubling book for you because
Oh
of
God.
But anyway,
Oh,
we
great.
don't have to go down that road because I haven't even written the book yet. I just have like an idea of the plot, but I think that's going to really kind of hit that particular fear. But we'll go on.
Well, I mean, you've already got me hook, line, and sinker on that one, Jonathan. I'm already 2 books in, so I can't back out now.
Well, good. All right, good. Too far down that road.
The stakes are too high. I'm too invested.
Good, good.
But anyway, and also, to kind of get back to the dystopianness of this novel, like the
Yeah,
catastrophe of it all, it felt a little bit like you were in conversation with the COVID pandemic, and I feel like we're kind of having this thing come up in books where we're talking about COVID while not talking about COVID.
yeah,
And that's very much seen in some of the scenes with your main character. And I'll say like one other, I don't want to say who it is, but like they're stuck at home for a time.
yeah,
Oddly, it was very cozy. And I think that kind
yeah.
of speaks to like our COVID trauma that I felt like it was cozy and like
We
comforting.
totally agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just wanted to kind of open up the floor for you to talk about if that was in fact kind of a COVID nod or like inspired by COVID and like where that came from for you.
Yeah, no, I just think that, it came clearly that experience worldwide affected everybody. It
Mm.
affected you, it affected me, it affected all of us in different ways. And I mean, I don't think it makes me, I mean, obviously it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. And I was like, just okay, so the cozy part of it, I first of all agree with because I think for the first time in a long time, people were kind of forced to maybe simplify a little bit and
Oh
then
yeah.
like take more walks with their family members or play board games and things like that. And it's a little bit like when there's a power outage. It's like that feeling only was expanded into months or whatever. So I think that's very accurate. That there was that bit of the main character with his daughter Emma
Hmm.
feeling like, making the best of a tough situation, which I think we all try to do during COVID. And I think then, but the way it's expressed in this book is that like, okay, so here's the situation, here's what's happening. How would the world respond to it? And I think it logically just went down some of those steps. It's like
Yeah.
we established certain protocols, like schedules or like, essential workers or, grocery store rations, things like that. Like we've all, seen glimpses of that now. We've seen what that feels like. And so it was very easy for me to then to me all the stuff that happens, of course I would think this, but it's like I think it's the way the world would react. I think that
Yeah.
there would be a schedule because they wouldn't want people out because people are getting abducted. Because there are so many people abducted in the book, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands. So, yeah, and I think that there would be like, so they wouldn't want everybody overrunning the grocery stores at one time. So they'd try to probably schedule people who go there at certain times. I think that as you're kind of alluding to, there would be people who would rebel against that and like, get angry about that. And and I think I think that there are moments that feel kind of politically charged in the book, but to me, we've already lived through it. And to me, we know it's kind of real. And
Oh
to
yeah.
me, it reads very true. Like I think that a lot, and you mentioned one of the characters. There's this character. I think I know who you're talking about. This guy named Dean
Mhm.
Dawson, who's in the same neighborhood as my main character. And this guy, like, some people see that. Well, I mean, let's just be honest. When the stock market tanks, that's when the ultra rich buy everything, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's an opportunity. So when COVID was happening, I don't think it's any like shock that the distribution of wealth, that the disparity became more pronounced
Yeah.
because, while a lot of people were struggling, other people were buying because they had that disposable income. And there were people who accumulated more wealth. There would be people who would try to accumulate more power, and that's kind of what happens in my book. That whole idea, like people, it's weird. It's like people, like I think we all have scenarios where we are the hero. Like we want to like, I mean, I go back to earliest childhood, like Superman. Like my favorite scenes in Superman were when, Christopher Reeve would save somebody. So I don't think that alone is a negative thing or an evil impulse. But I think that when we start to take that into the real world and we start to crave scenarios that could even catastrophic scenarios, and then we want to intervene so we can be the hero, then I think you can start to get into some negative things. And I think that's where you get into that character of Dean.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think, a couple things that you said. I think that the quote unquote like cozy element of being, confined to a home with family, like we
Yeah.
were in COVID, is like
Yeah.
you were forced to be present and like we kind of had to have conversations that we wouldn't normally have.
Yes.
And there's something to be said for that. And that's there, it's an oddly touching thing to be able to get that time with your family. Because like, for instance, I was a senior in college whenever COVID hits, like my last semester was spent with my family
Oh,
before
wow.
like, planning the rest of my life. So like that was time with my
Wow.
family that I don't know that I necessarily would have gotten. Um,
Wow.
it's
What
a it's a
timing?
yeah, exactly. It's a great like am I sad that I missed out on the end of college? Absolutely. But also there was a lot of good memories with my mom and dad too. So like,
Yeah.
there's something to be said for that. And then the same thing that you're saying on the flip side of that is all these like nefarious things. It's just opportunists. Like for every opportunity
Yes.
that they're available to come out on top, come out better,
Yeah.
and not really, it's always under the guise of helping everybody, but
Right.
it's really,
The greater good, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I do like that you were able to offer the, I guess like the microcosm of that within even the neighborhood in this
Yeah.
book before, like launching, like you were able to give us that before we even get into all of the other parts of this book to make it go around. It was just a really interesting facet. And like you said, I mean, unfortunately, we've seen what that looks like. We've seen the reality of this thing if it were to happen. So
We really
it's not,
have.
it's not a reach.
Oh, it's not. And I think also it reminds me a little bit of like the zombie genre, even though this isn't a zombie book at all. I think that one of the patterns that we see, and it's a good pattern because it's interesting, is that the humans end up being scarier than the zombies.
Yep.
And even though I think the aliens in this book are really scary, and I think v readers will just hate them and fear them, it's funny. I've read a few reviews, and they they talk about some of they talk about like the main human villain too, and it's
Yeah.
like yeah, and I think that's because like I don't think he's an unbelievable character. Unfortunately, I think he's like a lot of people we've all encountered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's unfortunate that we do know that, but it is
Yeah.
what it is. So I kind of want to wrap up our conversation on the book, and again, I want to talk about the ending, but of course I'm not going to spell out the ending. Um, it also brought me to tears. You have
Oh,
you have
thank
a
you.
thing with endings. I literally like texted someone. I was like, he did it again. He did it again.
Thank you.
How did you always know that you were gonna have that element to that ending? And you even talked about it, the one that makes you emotional. Did you always know that it would be like that?
No, I didn't. I
Mm.
never, I never know where they're gonna go.
Yeah.
I never know. And I think that's really a dangerous, exhilarating, and honest way to write. Nothing wrong with plotting, nothing wrong with outlining. A lot of amazing writers outline. I used an outline once, I think. But yeah, no, I didn't know where it was going. And when I arrived, I start to sense where I'm going, and then it's like a matter of okay. Am I going to go with it or am I going to, I always end up going with it, but there's always that impulse in me to resist it if it's not a totally happy place.
Yep.
And that happened especially, I don't know if you read Marla, but that happened with Marla. There's just a really like devastating death at the end, near the end of Marla that I was like, you can't do this. Come on, man. That's just you can't. Like that's against all the rules. And I set the book aside for months thinking I was going to come up with something better. I'm like, nope, it has to happen. So I wrote it. This one I didn't do that. This one I got there. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Because I mean, but I think that, I think all that matters, and this is, I believe this in story, all that matters is that you stay true to the characters and you stay true to the story. And sometimes that's a really super happy ending. Sometimes, like Lenora, and we've already talked about this, I think it's a bittersweet ending. I think Lenora is a really sad story, but I think it also is, and I think you used the word hopeful. I
Hmm.
think it's a very hopeful story too. And sometimes a really awful ending is the right ending. Sometimes the ending where everybody dies, that can be right too. There's a Brian Keene, I won't say which book it is, but it's a sequel to one of his books that when I read that ending, I'm like, oh my gosh, could you get any bleaker, man? It was so dark, but then I went back and I'm like, yeah, that was the right ending. So regardless of whether it's happy, sad, or in between, I think you just find the right one, and I think I did. But boy, I think it's very emotional. I will
Yeah.
say that. A very emotional ending.
Yeah, I think yeah. That's all I could say is yeah. I'm glad that we had the same reaction whenever we arrived at it. You're come on, man. Yeah, that was I was like, "Oh, here we go. This is where we're going." But in a good way. In a good way, but I was like, "Shit, my heart." You know, I don't know. Again, I can't really say that much because I really don't want to spoil it for anybody. I really want people to arrive at it on their own, but whoo, you did it again. That's all I can say. But that does bring most of my questions about the book to a close. I really, really loved it. I think that it's a really special book, like I said, that can, straddle a lot of lines. And I think it's a book that is very you. I'm going to be honest, I don't know that I've read a book that haven't been like, oh, that's not Jonathan's. But I think in particular, this one, from like the little things, like you have a bookstore called the Constant Reader Cafe.
Yeah,
There's just certain little pieces of this that I feel like you really write with all of you, and I think that that's really cool as a reader to see time and time again whenever you pick up, your work. So yeah, I think it's a really cool book. I think people are gonna really enjoy it just because you cover so much ground, like we've talked about across so many genres. You do so much.
thank you.
Um, to pull away from the book a little bit, what does the rest of your 2025 look like? Obviously the book is coming out on September 16th, but if you're allowed to talk about what you're working on now, if there's anything, I of course love to hear about it, but I don't want ever want to get anybody in trouble.
No, 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 you're not. I've got like it's so wild how many things I have. And I've just become very patient. Like I'm not
Yeah.
actually patient, but I force myself to be patient. So I force myself to wait until the right situation comes along for a book. But boy, oh boy, do I have a lot. I want Marla to come back out, and I think it will. I have one called The Stars Have Left the Skies. I'm editing it right now. It's a winter horror novel, and it's a little bit inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing, and
Oh,
I
hell yeah.
freaking love it. I love it so much. It's wild. It's one of the wildest books I've written. I've got an epistolary novel in the style of Dracula. It's a vampire novel called The Impaled that's going to be a sequel to The Dismembered. I shouldn't say a sequel. It's in the same universe as The Dismembered.
I'll
Yeah.
take it though. I love that. I
Yeah, I
love
think
that
that
story
might
so
be the first
much.
time I've said that title here on any show. So yeah, I'm about 60, 70% done with that one.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about that. That's just been so fun to write, and through letters and newspaper articles and all the trappings like you had. And I love Dracula, so it's been fun to kind of write a book like that. So I've got that. I have another one that I developed with a creative executive at Lit Entertainment. They're my movie manager,
Hmm.
and my company that I work with. So one of the creative executives and I, we worked on something. We create. It's a novel and it's done, and I just love it. So it's that. That's another one. Then I wrote one this summer that is the biggest thing I've ever written. And it's already 160,000 words. Like I think the average novel is somewhere around like 80.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like twice as long as the average novel already, and I'm not done with it yet. I still have another 40,000 words to write, something like that, 30 or 40,000. So it's the biggest thing I've ever written by far, the biggest canvas I've ever written. It is a combination of, and this is all organic, it is a combination dystopian, sci-fi, action, horror, adventure, romance, all of them. It's just got like it's such a giant, not like the biggest budget movie of all time. And I love it so much. And so I'm not quite done writing it, but I'll finish that before the calendar year ends. And yeah, so those are just a few things that I'm working
Just a
on.
few. Just a
Just a
few.
few, and I left a couple out, but those are a few. Yeah.
Well, damn. Okay. I guess the better question is, what are you not writing at this
Right?
point?
Exactly. Exactly. That
Yeah.
is your question.
No, I love that though, and I think I really love that you I feel like you have a genuine excitement about dipping your toe in whatever water comes flowing next, whether it's
Yeah.
vampires or, whatever the setting. Because like the Dismembered, I love that story, and it's so like the tone that you write in and the voice that you write in for that story is so unique. I'm such a fan of it, what you're able to pull off with it. So no, I think that it's great, and I love that you're able to just like, yeah, we'll give this a go. We'll see how this goes.
I'm so glad I said that on this show then, because because that's been a really fun. I don't think I've said that anywhere. But yeah, and thank you for saying that about the Dismembered. It's so fun. Like I love older books. I love, that feeling. I love that style, and it's just so fun and fascinating, and you can get lost in these other times and these other worlds. I just love that. Yeah, it's a blast. It's a
Yeah.
blast to write in that area. And also too, I think what you talked about with me, I think that's because I'm not like I am the least calculated writer I've ever met. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing because it means sometimes I'm a really bad businessman because I don't write the thing that I think is gonna sell really well. I write the thing that's really exciting and I try to keep commerce out of it. And I go into that magical place and that's where I live. And I come out with this book. And that's not always the smartest way to do things probably since this is a business, but I do feel like I'm being true to my characters and my stories by doing that. Yeah.
I would agree. And, I mentioned it before, but like I feel like a lot of the things that I pick up that I read from you, I can tell that they're yours. And I think that there's like really something to be said for that because, and I've talked to many, many other authors about this, like the reason that we all reach for art or pick up art in this form is like we want to feel less alone. So if you know somebody's being genuine with their art and you pick it up and you're like, oh, hey, I feel, and then like you have that instant connection. You're not wondering if it's bullshit either because like you know that it's real. So I
Yeah.
think I understand where you're coming from on the business end of things, but I think that there is something special if you can keep the heart of it in it the way that, that you talk about it. It's I think it's special to not be callous by the business aspect of it, to not get worn down by it all.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that wraps up about all of my questions. Is there anything that you wanted to discuss, bring up, anything that I did not mention today?
No, you're just awesome. Like it's just so fun to interact with you. This has been a blast, which I knew it would be, but you are so much you're so incredibly insightful and that I mean that. Like you really are like an insightful like like you bring a lot to the table. Like when I read your reviews, when you bring a lot and that's a really kind of unique and awesome thing. So I just thank you for this, and I thank you for just being you. And I'm just so happy to have you in horror. It's awesome. I mean, it's like I'm very I don't know like it's nice to have good people, and you're just a very genuine person. Like you never feel calculated. You never feel like there's BS. It's just like it's always I can just tell you're always very honest, and that's a
Oh
really,
yeah.
really that's a good thing. That's a really good thing.
Sometimes to a fault, but yeah, no. I appreciate that very, very much. No, I talk about it all the time. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled that I even get the opportunity to talk to y'all, doing all this and just like even getting a chance to like dip my toe into all this has been so much fun, and having conversations like this is, what keeps it all going. So thank you so much again for your time. And just to recap, you have the story Lenora is already out. The book is on shelves. The End of the World as We Know It. It's an anthology. It's been edited by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. And then on September 16th from Blackstone Publishing, Veil, your sci-fi, horror, action adventure, whatever you want to call it, book will be on shelves. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and until next time.
Thank you so much. You've been amazing, my friend.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is my conversation with Mr. Jonathan Janz. As you can tell, it is a very fun time getting to chat with him as we went over a bit the allotted hour, and I am so, so grateful that he answered all of my questions. And we had very many different talking points from his short story in the Stand anthology, his novel, and everything else. So it's always just a delight to be able to cover the full spectrum of horror whenever you're talking to a guest like Jonathan. So huge thanks to him. Now, looking forward to next week. You are getting 2 interviews. Don't get me wrong. Now, which two you are getting in the order that you're getting them in is still up in the air. So stay tuned. Early next week, I will be announcing the Tuesday episode on social media. Yeah. And until then, I hope that you all are doing well. The world is insane at this moment, but I am so thankful for all of you and for this space and this community. And until next week, I'll see you guys.